All right, hey everyone. Just to introduce myself, I'm Greg Rayborn. I'm the still relatively new executive director here at Compass, and we just want to welcome everyone to tonight's education series presentation. So this will be a look at housing and transportation along the Wasatch Front today and in the future with Meg Padjen of the Wasatch Front Regional Council in Salt Lake City. So just as a brief orientation, Utah, along with Idaho and much of the U.S., has been facing a persistent housing shortage and affordability crisis that continues to evolve. In response to this, housing issues have been elevated in state policy and in the work of our friends at the Wasatch Front Regional Council over the past several years. Addressing these complex issues demands an all-hands-on-deck approach, including both private and public sectors and all levels of government. So in tonight's session, we will explore the evolution of regional visioning along the Wasatch Front, and then discuss state policy around housing as it links to the transportation-focused work of the Wasatch Front Regional Council. So Ms. Padjen will highlight initiatives at the Wasatch Front Regional Council, such as stationary planning, as well as other tools and data that they're using to support housing and transportation policy. So as a quick bio, Meg Padjen serves as the Director of Community and Economic Development at the Wasatch Front Regional Council, where she leads planning, technical assistance, and economic development activity in the Salt Lake City area. Her work has recently been focused on creating and implementing policies regarding planning around fixed transit stations, with a focus on increasing housing affordability. She has a Master's of City and Metropolitan Planning degree from the University of Utah and a graduate certificate in real estate development. Her career has really been dedicated to helping communities enhance the quality of life available to all of their current and their future residents. And you can find her full bio on the table at the back of the room by the door. Some quick housekeeping things before Meg comes up. Just note, we got soft drinks and refreshments at the back by the side wall over there. Restrooms are out the door to the right and then on your right. If you didn't sign in, please do so before you leave. We're recording tonight's presentation and we'll have it available on YouTube, on Compass's YouTube channel, and we'll also share her presentation on our website. And then just last reminder, please silence your cell phones, and then join me now by welcoming Meg Padjen.
Thank you. I need that. Keep time. Hi everyone, thank you for having me. This is great. I don't make it up to Idaho enough for living in Utah, just so close. So thanks for the opportunity to come up here. This is such a wonderful, tight-knit group tonight. We can just make this really conversational. I have some breaks throughout where we can ask questions, but if you have a burning question, raise your hand and we'll just go that direction at that point. I have been asked to silence your cell phones, make sure those are quiet, so we can all focus tonight, and we'll just jump in. This is what I'm going to talk about today. So at the end of our session today, I hope you will have learned more about how housing and transportation are connected, how they're linked, what we do at the Wasatch Front Regional Council. Maybe it will inspire some thoughts for things that you might be able to do here in your region, or maybe you will pat yourself on the back and go, hey, we've got that covered, and then some. And so just kind of, it's always fun to compare regions. Regional work is being done all over the country, but it's really different everywhere you go. And then, there's some tools I'm going to talk about, some policies. I hope you come away with something tonight, and we'll jump in. First, who's here? Can I just ask you all to shout out your name and where you work, or what brought you here, since it's a small group. Is that okay? Can I start here?
Yep. Austin Miller. I'm a planner here at Compass.
I'm Jacob Miller, just a civil engineer interested in planning.
I'm Walter Steed. I'm the chair of, let me think, the Meridian Transportation Commission, the Valley Regional Transit Advisory Council, and the ACHD CICAC.
Wow. That's quite the alphabet there. Thank you.
Doug Critchfield, a principal planner with the city of Nampa.
I'm Gary. I'm president of the Josie Gallo Admiration Society.
I want to be a member.
You're in.
I'm Marina, I'm a planner with the city of Una.
I'm Jan, I'm a member of the community.
I'm Byron Falwell, I'm an architect in Boise.
And I'm Alexa Rickman, I'm a planner here at Compass.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. So we have lots of practitioners in the room, some community members. I've got a whole bunch of content today. I'll kind of go through, and if there's a specific interest in some of it, I can take my time and make sure to give you all of it. And then some of it might be worth skipping. So we will see here. So first, the Wasatch Front Regional Council, the organization where I work. This is where we're at. So here's a map of Utah. And you can see the highlighted portion, that's our boundary. We have a couple of different organizations I'll talk about, and they have different boundaries. But essentially, we're right there along the Wasatch Front in Utah. It looks like a small portion of the state, but it's over half the population's right there in our region. Here's some demographic information. So we have about 2 million residents today, about 668 households in our region alone. And then in the next 25 years, we're projected to add about 500,000 people, 25% of our current population, and about 319,000 households. So you can see households are, if you do the math there, households are getting a little bit smaller coming into our region. And there's all kinds of reasons for that. But the population's absolutely growing, and the county that's south of Salt Lake County here on the map is growing really rapidly too. And so we have some changing regional dynamics where people aren't just coming south to Salt Lake City for work. People are perhaps passing Salt Lake City or leaving the Salt Lake County area to go south for work or coming north. So it's changing a little bit, just how people move and use our region. Salt Lake is still by far our metro center, but our boundaries are sort of merging with the urbanized area south of us. Just for context, there's about 3.5 million people in Utah, so this is by far our most urban area in the state. A little bit about housing in Utah. So as Craig said up here, we're in a housing crisis like much of the country. I continue to call it a crisis. We are working on it. There has been some really positive changes in the last 5 years, but the problem itself has also grown and changed, and so I think it's a wicked problem and a lifelong battle. But at right now today, we're about 44,000 units short for the households that we have. Right now, the idea is that 44,000 units would be filled today if we had them. Housing market is challenging in and of itself. Those 44,000 units would have to be able to be afforded by those who need them, right? So that's a challenge that we have. There's units on the market, but that doesn't mean people that need them can afford them. By 2040, we need, this to me really paints the picture of a lot of the work that we're doing at the Wasatch Front Regional Council and around the state in housing policy. In the next 15 years, we need 0 large lots because we have them, not because no one wants them. We have lots of them. We need about 90,000 small lots. That's defined somewhere, but think of like an eighth or a tenth of an acre. And we need 100,000 attached homes. So this is our current deficit plus the deficit we're expecting in the next 15 years. So we have our work cut out for us. We have a really wonderful research organization that's partnered with the University of Utah, the Kempsey Gardner Policy Institute, that keeps housing data fed to us constantly. It's a little doom and gloom every time we hear from them, but we're happy to have a partner that has their ear so close to the ground on this. We have a really good sense of where we're at on housing. And then a little bit more about WFRC, what we are, and then I'll get into what we do. Wasatch Front Regional Council is 3 organizations under one roof. Sort of similar to Compass, right? We all wear a few different hats. We are a Metropolitan Planning Organization, so long-range transportation planning is a federally required thing that we do. We have an urban area of such a population, so we're required to have a Metropolitan Planning Organization that does that. We're also what Utah calls an association of governments. So while our state is not covered by the boundary of metropolitan planning organizations, it is covered by the boundaries of 7 associations of governments. So these are large regions throughout our state. The state has assigned some requirements for association of governments, as well as has put some essentially contracts with funding for us to do some work. And so some of what we do is dictated by the state. We work closely with the state on those policies when they come around, but we do have organizations like us all over. And then we're an economic development district, federally sanctioned by EDA, so we have access to some EDA funding through that. So we're 3 official organizations, and our core products, similar to Compass, Regional Transportation Plan and Vision. That's something we're working on all the time. We adopt one and we turn around and we do another. We do a new regional transportation plan every 4 years. And then I would characterize our other core product as technical assistance and capital funding. So we have money for roads, federal formula funding for capital projects. We also have a lot of technical assistance that comes through our door. It's a drop in the bucket compared to that capital funding, but I'll talk a lot about technical assistance today. It's something we've been doing probably for 15 years, but really formally for about 11 or 12. Our organization's mission, WFRC builds consensus and enhances quality of life by developing and implementing visions and plans for a well-functioning, multimodal transportation system, livable communities, a strong economy, and a healthy environment. This is my team. I think it's fun to go talk with other regions, and we always have these small but mighty teams. It seems like not everywhere. Some of them have huge teams, but they're great. They're wonderful to work with. I've been there for 11 years. Here are our roles as an organization. We're a convener. We bring folks together. Partners, our committees, of course, our elected officials in our region. We're a technical expert when welcomed, right? We have a fair amount of trust in our community. We're lucky to have that. And we're invited often as a technical expert. We're planners. We have a lot of planners in our shop, and a big part of what we do is planning. And we're implementers. So this is kind of getting to the capital funding piece of what we do, some of our technical assistance, and a lot of our other work. We do not tell our cities what to do, right? We don't lobby. So there are things that we just certainly don't do. And I think it's really important to the trust that we've built to continue to not do those things. Okay, here's one of my break slides. So whenever you see my little agenda pop up, this is just a really good moment to ask questions or take a little break. Does everybody got it? What WFRC is? Okay, that one's pretty simple. Okay, I'm gonna jump into our regional visioning. And this is really similar to your Communities in Motion work. This is kind of our version. We can compare and contrast and ask questions if there's something that's different from what you do. We'll jump in. So what we have is called the Wasatch Choice Vision. This is our vision out to 2050 right now. We're currently working on our 2055 vision. So we're pushing that horizon out a little bit. We're about halfway through that. This vision overlays transportation and land use out to 2050. That's just put very simply. I actually have a video on this I'm going to share, so I don't have to do all the talking. But here's what it looks like. It's a map of the region. It has all modes of transportation, roads, transit, active transportation, to 2050. So those are phased in our regional transportation plan. Those projects might be done in 10 years or 20 years or 30 years, but they're all together for the vision, right? It's what our network would look like. And then we have our land use overlay on top of that. And that's mostly centers. We're going to talk about that a lot today. Let's see if this video will play.
Utah is growing, and we have a plan. Our future quality of life depends on the choices we make today. The Wasatch Choice Vision is our community's shared vision for transportation investments, development patterns, and economic opportunities. Utah is one of the fastest growing states in the nation, and with rapid growth come challenges and opportunities. The Wasatch Choice Vision was created with broad community input. It represents a shared vision for our future. Its 4 key strategies can help us find solutions as we address challenges and plan for tomorrow in a way that preserves and even enhances our quality of life. People want choices on how they get around, by car, bus, or train, bike, or walk. The Wasatch Choice Vision includes our shared plan for investment to support biking and walking, roadways, and public transportation. As Utah's population continues to grow and change, it's essential to offer a diverse set of housing options across the Wasatch Front and Utah for people with varying preferences at different life stages and with different income levels. Our outdoor recreation areas continue to face a record number of visitors year after year, not just in the mountains or at our national parks, but also in parks and on trails closer to home. We need more parks and public spaces as we grow. City and town centers are the hearts of our communities. Walkable areas with a mix of homes, jobs, and amenities located by major road and transit connections. These Wasatch Choice Centers give Utahns great options for where to live, work, and play. Where growth occurs matters. While there's no one-size-fits-all approach, as communities grow and work together to implement the Wasatch Choice vision, we'll see many benefits. Stronger communities, improved transportation, enhanced environment, more housing choices, fiscal responsibility, and a strong economy. Utah's economic strength depends on how easily people can access job and educational opportunities. Growth is still coming, and communities along the Wasatch Front have a plan. The Wasatch Choice Vision, to maintain and enhance quality of life even as we grow. Learn more about the Wasatch Choice Vision and participate in your community's conversation about how to address today's challenges and create a brighter tomorrow.
Okay, I wanted to put that video, it's a little dated already, which it's just kind of crazy how fast things become outdated. We're already working on the next version of that video, and I think that one was only 3 years old, but the data has changed, so I was kind of smirking during that video. And the new video is going to be better, so maybe I'll send that one to you, everyone. But it also shows you a little bit of Utah, a little bit of our region, so it's a good look. How did we get here with this local buy-in that we have? This vision is a voluntary vision. So the cities in our region choose to participate in our visioning process, and they choose to participate when we discuss implementing the vision, bringing them resources, etc. So how did we get here? Building trust over time, and it takes time, and it's, as you know, with anything in life, trust is hard to build and easy to lose. But we do that by respecting local land use authority. We don't have any land use authority. They do, but we bring them resources and information wherever we can. We have a lot of small communities with very limited staff in our region, and we provide support. The locals also benefit from being part of the vision. There's strength in numbers. This is the conversation around specifically housing policy, land use policy in general in Utah, evolves every year, and the low-hanging fruit for things that the state can do to help with housing has mostly been picked. And so the conversations get harder and harder every year, and we actually have a really wonderful process. I'll talk a little bit more about housing policy later. We have a really wonderful relationship between our cities and counties and state legislators, but new legislators come in, they have big ideas, or maybe some are frustrated with the lack of progress, and they throw out big proposals that would be really detrimental to local control, or maybe haven't been fully thought through and they'd be detrimental to the region itself. And so there's some strength in numbers by all the cities saying, hey, we're working on this together. There's transportation benefits. Transportation is a very regional issue. And so being a part of those conversations and not letting the transportation come to you or be done to you as a city pays off in multitudes. And there's benefits to collaboration with neighbors. And I think our cities really see that. Some of them are really small, and so they do not have all of the amenities available that our communities might need. And so knowing what amenities are available in neighboring communities, understanding why a neighboring community might have this one few block area as their growth area, but it's right on your boundary and you don't want that there, right? Those conversations with neighbors can be really helpful. And so we gather sub-regionally, we gather with just individual cities, we gather in lots of different ways to have these conversations. And then I'll also say we're on our 6th version of this vision. So it's not that the first vision was super detailed and it didn't have as much buy-in, right? Maybe people didn't know about it. Now a lot of our cities, our counties, our partners have a poster of the vision in their office. So it takes time. And also, as your vision becomes more prestigious, the buy-in, I think, builds. Our Wasatch Choice vision is sort of funneled into 3 pots. So it's transportation, land use, and economic development. And there's implementing documents or programs for each of those. For the transportation sections, the regional transportation plan. For land use, it's local land use. So we have all kinds of support for our locals to implement the vision in their communities. And for economic development, it's essentially our comprehensive economic development strategy, which is a product required because we're an economic development district. But what we've done with our comprehensive economic development strategy is try really hard to tie it to the rest of our work. The economic development industry can kind of be on an island, just as transportation and land use can kind of be on their own islands from each other. Economic development is really here and now. What can we bring now? And it often just doesn't have the same long-range look. Not that they're not thinking long-term, but not in the same way we're thinking about transportation. And so we try really hard to try and bridge those. On the RTP, there's a regional transportation plan here too, but I'll just give a little overview. This is done in partnership with our cities and our counties. It's done in partnership with our Department of Transportation and with our Transit Authority. And we bring in all kinds of other voices throughout the process as well. But it's a vision for roadways, transit, and active transportation. And it's become more and more detailed over the years, particularly in active transportation, which is sort of relatively new to have a regional transportation plan. We now have comfort levels in our regional transportation plan for active transportation, which is exciting. There's all kinds of modes of transportation represented in the regional transportation plan. It goes out for the horizon of our vision, and then it's phased in decades by both need, when those projects are needed, as well as the financial constraints. So when the money would actually be available. It does not necessarily say this is when this project is being funded. That process still has to happen, applications for funding and things. On the land use side, we get this vision of transportation overlaid with all of the land use of the different communities. So I'm going to talk a lot about these centers, but I want to show you what they look like on the map, just kind of polygons throughout the area. If you've seen a local zoning map, it's kind of similar but much more generalized. And that's so that we can have a regional look, right? The workshops are how we produce the vision. So over the 4-year cycle where we're producing our vision, we go out each year to a sub-region of like 6 or 8 communities. We talk with their staff, all in that same room. Staff, planning commission, city councils, mayors, and we bring our DOT and our transit authority. We invite legislators for the area. We try to bring in all those stakeholders into the same room, and then we literally roll out maps. You've probably done some things like this in your region. We have tape for transportation lines, we have stickers for centers, and each of those 4 workshops are a little different. We get a little bit further into the weeds. We complete our land use layer 2 years before. I'm getting into the technical here because I have a lot of technical people in the room. But we do complete our land use layer a couple of years before we have our transportation plan for the vision, because we model land use change on that layer. So our cities tell us how and where they're going to grow, and then we actually do the real estate modeling around that growth, as they've told us it will occur in addition to other demographic data that we get. And that's how we produce our transportation plan. So those things are they happen in phases. We also at this workshop have a lot of conversations about choices and how we grow, trade-offs around growth. Here's an existing conditions, it's kind of a new model that we made for one of our rural areas. We have conversations about, okay, if you were to add 1,100 units to this area, it could look like this, with fairly spread out, large lots, infrastructure all the way to the edge of the community. It could be some large lots, some medium lots. Maybe this allows you to have a small neighborhood center, or maybe it's really focused on just kind of the portion of your community nearest to regional transportation, and maybe you have a larger neighborhood center and you preserve a lot of your open space, you can see that there's some infrastructure trade-offs here, some preservation of open space trade-offs. We get into conversations about water, etc. And these are really healthy conversations. They're not simple. Folks in the room will ask questions like, well, what happens when the rest of that farmland wants to develop, right? And there are some strategies, at least legally in Utah, where you can do a transfer of development rights or things like that. But we have to have conversations with our communities in order to get to the vision. And it's really productive, and particularly in some of our rapidly growing rural areas, they're very worthwhile conversations to have. So we talk about trade-offs, we talk about choices a lot, and then ultimately we get ourselves the land use vision, the land use layer of the Wasatch Choice Map. We actually, this year, for the first time, sent this back to every elected official every local elected official for them to kind of discuss and confirm with us that this layer is correct, rather than kind of saying, okay, this is what we've heard, here it is. We got an additional layer of buy-in on this. It's more detailed than it's ever been. The boundaries are really specific. We go through with each community and really do some detailed revisions to these boundaries, have some in-depth conversation with city planners, and a lot of cities are in the middle of their own planning, right? And so this is kind of a layered process for them. Okay, that's all about the regional vision. Any questions? Discussion prompts? Yeah.
Yeah, so when you're talking about growth or you're factoring in growth, how do you factor in redevelopment, particularly say in Salt Lake where there's a lot of that going on right now? Absolutely. How do you factor that into your transportation planning?
Yeah, it's so different for our kind of our peripheral communities that are greenfield, and then some of our communities along the transportation core that their opportunities are infill or redevelopment. We actually have talked about this a lot as an organization because our model, it's called the real estate market model, it does what you tell it to, and it tries to think like a developer, but it misses what I call the charm. It's not going to choose to put a newer building where an older building is over greenfield, the same building on greenfield, right? So we both trained our model to consider infill opportunities, and we override the model with the local plans in some ways. So if they've said this area is high priority for redevelopment, and we have a level of confidence that they're working on that that's truly their plan and has buy-in, then we're able to intensify that area over what the model would have done. And so many of our centers along our core are in infill and redevelopment areas. And we help cities think through that quite a bit through our technical assistance process. But yes, we do have, it is kind of a trade-off when you're doing regional modeling work, and you can't go in and say, oh, I know that this area has, the model doesn't know that a building is vacant necessarily. It knows when it was built, right? So there's a lot of nuance there. And I get in fun arguments with my analytics team about this. But yeah, we've come a long way over the years in that. There's one more.
I'm very interested in, you're obviously doing a lot of analysis, a lot of imagination. Does anybody implement anything that you offer?
Yes, the visioning is the imagination stage, absolutely. And there's a lot of analysis behind it. It's not pie in the sky, right? And it's grounded in reality and local policy. But yes, that in the technical assistance section, I'll talk a lot about what the cities are actually doing. But yes, people are implementing the vision.
Quick question, you can answer this later if there's a better time for it, but I really like this this note that you have about being on the sixth revision of this process, but then you also talk about building trust with your local community. And I'm putting those two things together and imagining how poorly that could go here if it's not handled well. How do you handle that? How do you do both of those? They seem counterintuitive to me.
I see. So the sixth version of the vision is because the vision is updated every time the regional transportation is updated. They're sort of one and the same when it comes to transportation. The regional transportation plan is required by FHWA to be updated on a 4-year cycle, and we refresh the vision alongside of it. We don't start from scratch. we're usually adding detail to the vision when we come back to them. And we have a little bit of a log of what we heard from them. Granted, if you wait 4 years to do an update, you might have a whole new council for a city, right? So they're being shown what their predecessors have put in front of them, or have put on the vision. They see that in front of them, and they're able to make changes. Sometimes sometimes in a workshop, a city council person is like, oh, remove that whole center, or let's put a big center here, right? And then through the process, that gets refined. And it usually gets a lot closer to what it was 4 years ago, because the city's plans have drastically been overridden like that, right? So I would say it's the 6th version, but it's iterative each time. It doesn't start over. Let's see what you mean. And actually, we can do formal amendments to the vision even within that 4 years. So a city can come to us and they can say, hey, we updated our general plan. That's what we call them in Utah. Some places they're a comprehensive plan. The city can say, we updated our general plan and we want the vision to reflect that. And we can formally have our council approve a revision to the vision. For land use, that actually is not a council vote, because locals have land use control. So we don't have other cities vote on their land use. But for transportation, we can make a formal amendment to the vision throughout the 4 years. So I'm telling you, it can change even more than every 4 years. But I think because we begin with the last version of the vision and we talk about the last process, it usually gets, I would say, better and better, but more and more detailed, more specific.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I'm going to talk a lot about the centers that are a part of the vision. Stop me at any time, because this is a larger section. But this is how we represent land use. We're a regional organization. We don't have land use authority. And a vision really would be helpful if we had every little block as its zone, right? You wouldn't be able to see the big picture. And so our intention with the vision is to make it detailed enough that it matters, and it's not just fluff, and to make it high level enough or summarized enough that you can get some meaning out of it. So what is a center? Centers can look different in every single city, but they are, as we define them, they're always walkable, they're always mixed in use. There's housing plus other uses, right, maybe, and it kind of depends on the center. I'll talk about that. It depends on the scale. And they're more intense than the surrounding area. We kind of describe these as the heart of a community, or if you don't want all our technical terms, we say this is where you go to get ice cream. This is that place in your city that maybe you walk to with your family, or where you want to bring family coming from out of town if they were to visit. It says we've recently produced some really great imagery for centers, and this was needed in our region really badly. It was really needed like 8 years ago when we began talking about centers more, and we didn't have a lot of local on-the-ground examples of what a good center was. We have a few. They tend to be in Salt Lake City or in our bigger cities in Utah. And so it doesn't always resonate with some of your more rural communities, or communities that really want to stay suburban when you're talking about this neat little neighborhood center in your largest city. They don't always want to see themselves as that big city, right? And so recently we worked with a wonderful urban designer architect that produced some really great imagery. I'm going to show a lot of that as I describe what centers are, and then I'll show you our new resource where you can kind of dive into these models. And they're Utah context, but I imagine they fit a lot of your Idaho communities too, so you guys are welcome to take these and use them as you wish. Often we need these when we're talking to new elected officials who didn't necessarily run because they were deeply interested in land use. Maybe they were deeply interested in something else for their city, and they don't have the expertise in land use. Or maybe it's talking to some of our state legislators who have the whole gamut of issues in front of them and haven't thought a whole lot about what these things look like. So usually we're talking to these folks, or we're putting these in the hands of our city staffs so that they can have the same conversations. And I also want to talk about, what does it all have to do with housing? Where we come in as a regional organization is we say hashtag where matters sometimes. Where housing goes matters a lot to how our region functions. And so we don't necessarily come in as an organization with financing for purchasing a home or different programs for developing residential properties, right? We don't have land use authorities, so we're not approving the development of homes, but we're talking with our communities about thinking about where housing should go. We're growing, we need to grow in some places. Where is the best place for that so that we can maintain a transportation infrastructure that works? And so that people can have a really wonderful life and they can go places that are interesting to them and they're not stuck in 20 minutes of traffic to go to the grocery store, right? So our communities can kind of function as they grow and densify where that's happening. And maybe we can preserve some of our areas that don't need to be growing because they don't have as much access to the things people need to get to. This is a diagram that we kind of use to show what it means to have a network of centers. That big purple one in the middle would be something like our Salt Lake City or our metro center where you're going maybe every couple months to go to a concert if you don't live nearby, or you're getting dinner on date night in downtown Salt Lake City or whatever that is, whatever that is for your region, right? Then as you go out a little further, you have some large centers. Maybe they don't have quite the amenities that downtown does, but you have smaller events there. Maybe you're catching a weeknight movie in the park at some of those. And then we have our small neighborhood centers, and that might just be a corner or 3 corners, 4 corners with a coffee shop, city hall maybe, and maybe just somewhere you can grab a gallon of milk. But these are places that you might be able to even walk to. But they're not drawing people from all over the region necessarily, unless you have like a really great restaurant or something like that. This is our spectrum of centers. So centers can look differently in every community, and there are also different scales in every community. Neighborhood centers, like I said, are small, maybe you're grabbing your weekly needs there, and then it goes up to city center, urban center, and metro center. We have these kind of building height scales that you can see there to give you an idea. I'm going to dive into each of these. So this is our diagram of a neighborhood center. 1 to 3 stories is what we say is a neighborhood center locally. Now, a city can say this is our neighborhood center and it's different from your definition because of X. But if it's some of our other descriptions, right, this is a very global vision. And so these are just suggestions, but maybe you have some standard bus going to the center, maybe not, maybe you have no transit at all. This is a higher level bird's eye view we have for each of them. You do see lots of housing choices here. I would say this is a pretty dense neighborhood center for much of what we're expecting in Salt Lake City. Single family homes are absolutely surrounding some of our neighborhood centers. City center, maybe 1 to 4 stories, maybe you have a little bit more robust transit here, maybe not. But you can see there's all kinds of pedestrian infrastructure in this image, community gathering space. It builds a little bit on that neighborhood center. Up to urban center, we say this is 2 to 8 stories. You've got lots of elevators in an urban center. For us, there's maybe 3 or 4 of these existing in our region, quite a few more of them planned, as so we have some very high growth areas that the cities are actively implementing quite a bit of development in these areas. This is a center that might be served by more robust transit, like bus rapid transit. They all have the similar components though, some public gathering space, some nice elements if you're out walking, and then our metro center, 2 to however many stories, really big city downtown. This has a little amphitheater in the middle, and you can see lots of office in the background. You see a transit station in that one, and high-rise buildings.
So it says rail. If the density is already there, why is it rail?
Rail transit?
Well, on the last slide.
Yeah.
It says rail transit. If everybody's there, where's the transit going?
So in our region.
You're allowed to leave.
Oh, I see. So this is, I see, thank you. Definitely not intended to be everyone lives in centers. That's a really important piece of this. When we're saying the land use vision has centers throughout the region, they're mixed in with all kinds of other contexts like single family only neighborhoods or places that aren't very dense at all, open space. We have industrial districts on our vision. We have employment centers that It tends to be like your office campus. There's not a lot of other uses there, and there's no housing. We have special districts like schools, so the idea is certainly not that we want everyone to live in centers. I should make that very clear. It's more that there is a center and you can go to it. So ideally, this transit would go to lots of other places where people live or work, so that it's useful. Sorry that I didn't understand your question. Okay, and this is the model that those kind of fuzzy watercolor images are based on. There are 30 plus of these on our site now, and so you can go and they all kind of spin around like this. And you can kind of move through them. You can't walk around like Google Maps. Like you can't zoom down the street. But you can get a good idea of a 360 view of what we're calling a center. And with 33 different examples, there's a context that might fit, hopefully most of the West. You can click on these icons and they describe in quite a lot of detail the components, the technical components that really make these places a center. And so these can be really good if you're trying to do some interactive education with your local elected officials or planning commission. They can be really, I mean, if I was a planning student, I would be cheating on my essays by going into these and zooming around and seeing some of these technical description of these different urban design components. Yes, there's 33 of those now, so we have a lot more to point to when we're trying to talk to someone about what does a center look like. When we first started talking about centers in our visioning work, we had a lot of cities go, yeah, we have a center. Our target's over here. And that's wonderful, we need targets, that's great. But what was missing from that is that walkability component and the mix of uses, the housing, et cetera. And so cities, we're not telling cities, turn your target into a center. We're saying if there's opportunities for your community to grow, a center might have a lot of benefits. So keep your target.
Could you, by target, you don't mean like the store, what do you mean?
I do mean the store. Sorry, do you have targets here?
Yep.
Okay, I do mean the store. I mean big box retail, or they would talk about if they're a smaller community, their gas station. A gas station might be able to be a part of the center, but in and of itself does not make a center. Another resource that's part of this new visual work we've done is this before and after existing conditions. So each of these, I think there's 33, each of these models also have a bird's eye before and after where a hypothetical but likely existing condition was taken and then on top of it modeled with what would be years and years of redevelopment. And so you can kind of see the context in which these centers come from. This one's much more urban in the end. This is an urban center. This is very dense. And you can see that it's probably in a place that has been urban for a long time. They've got lots of big box retail, which might be great. I'm seeing a bunch of empty parking. One could make the assumption that maybe those are vacant. And there might be a real opportunity here for something that would really add to the life of this community and add a lot of housing options as well. This might be an area where neighbors wouldn't mind having a lot of new housing because what's there isn't serving them if in fact these are empty. Play along, it's hypothetical.
Just a quick clarifying question, and because I'm also seeing, do your centers have to be on maybe collectors or arterials specifically to that transportation aspect?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, as your centers get larger, you're going to want them to be in areas that are really accessible by multiple modes of transportation. But small, like a small neighborhood center, no way. Actually, maybe the smaller the street, the better. Maybe it's not necessarily your quietest neighborhood, but maybe there's a cross section with some dilapidated or vacant land, and it'd be the perfect place for those four corners to have a lovely use, a little cafe or something. And if the transportation is a little bit less robust, you're more likely to be able to walk with a nice peaceful environment. And because you're not trying to draw people from all over, not so much. But I would say the larger centers probably ought to be and are typically planned along more regionally significant transportation.
Really quick, so you all are famous for your gigantic city blocks.
do have gigantic blocks.
Yeah, so when we're looking at these, is there anything kind of hyper-specific or hyper-local about your visualizations that you don't think would translate well for what we're bringing over here? Because I see some granularity when you go to the next slide. With those, you're breaking up the blocks with developments.
Yeah.
Is that the idea?
Absolutely, that is the idea, and often when we're like diving deeply in with one city on planning their center, we do a lot of small area planning is what we call it, where we're just master planning an area about this size. We talk a lot about breaking up blocks in Utah, even if it is solely a pedestrian connection. We do have like 660-foot blocks. It's a long way to walk without a lot of interest. In fact, I worked on a project when I was early in my career along a streetcar, so absolutely transit right into development. And the block was almost 700 feet long, and we had worked on this really wonderful form-based code with all kinds of urban design requirements. Very costly to the developer to have all of those different requirements, but this area had a lot of potential. This really great apartment project was built, and now I walk alongside it, and even though it's got all the urban design features and it's really lovely and it has brick and has lots of windows and interest, we're still walking along this building for 600 feet. It is like the longest, and so those things really matter. And yes, we talk a lot about breaking up blocks in Utah, so maybe that wouldn't really translate. Though I'm sure there's some larger blocks here in Idaho too that could use being broken up. But yeah, and there's also some big mountains in the background of a lot of our imagery. When someone in the Midwest might look at them and be like, there's something in the background you needed to delete. But yeah, we do have a lot of mountains in this image. There's some different local influences for sure. But I think the concept largely translates. There's also a lot of transit in our imagery. That's applicable in some of our region. It's not applicable everywhere. But we wanted to make clear that there's a multimodal component to centers wherever there can be, just to provide choices. You'll also see, especially in some of the smaller centers, you'll see a lot of parking. It is tucked behind the buildings to make the pedestrian experience a little bit more pleasant, but you do see a lot of parking in these images, and that's contextually appropriate too, because we still love our cars in Utah. It's about choice. Okay, and the last piece of this resource, I just want to share this with you because it might be useful. These are designed to be posters and printed out in a room. So if you were to be, say, doing a workshop with City Council or something, there's all kinds of different resources on this site. Okay, and this is how you get to it. I can give this link to anybody after too. Okay, that was a lot on centers. I want to talk a little bit about the benefits of the vision, but specifically the way land use is represented on the vision and some of that centered growth. What's really cool about some new numbers that we have is it's what's on the ground today rather than projected, because we've been doing this visioning work for so long. The first thing I want to talk about is housing and transportation costs. This is the one data piece that I don't have for our region specifically. We're still deliberating over how exactly to represent this for our region. But the Center for Neighborhood Technologies uses this metric. They're sort of the standard for this metric. There's an industry accepted standard for what someone should spend on housing, what households should spend on housing to make it affordable, make it so that they're not cost burdened when it comes to housing, and that's 30%. No more than 30% of household income should be spent on housing. Once someone's spending over 30%, we call them a cost burdened household, and there's sort of a level of analysis we can do with that. There's also an industry accepted standard for how much a household should spend on housing and transportation combined, and for a regional organization like ours, that's a tiny bit more relevant for measuring the impact of our work, because we're talking about where housing might be built, what gives those new residents and current residents the best access around the region, and that's 45%. And so this is, in Utah, we're right on that 45% limit just about. But what's interesting about this metric to me for the state of Utah-wide is that housing is actually under that 30% threshold. This is, you have to keep in mind, this includes people who own their homes forever, their mortgages are paid off or very low, they refinance with that 2% window, right? So for some people, housing is very affordable in Utah. For some people, very unaffordable. It kind of depends on your timing. But the transportation costs in Utah, which can fluctuate more for a household, you can kind of change your transportation, what you're spending on your car a little bit more easily. You can sell a car a little easier than a home. That's over that 15%. It's more than its share. And so I share this to say, you know, the combination of the two really matters. Maybe housing is affordable because you're driving really far to get to where you need to go to work. Maybe you've chosen a house that's more affordable because it's far away. Or maybe you're just spending a lot because of the way that you've, the nature in which you set your life up, because you can't get to the things that you want to do on a weekly or monthly basis. They're not nearby. So this is a metric I like to use. This one's just okay. But more related to our vision and our region, this is the number of homes in Wasatch Front Regional Centers every year, or every 5 years for the last 15 years. And now we're up to 150,000 homes in our region. Today on the ground, 16% of homes are in the center. The rest of the folks live somewhere outside the center, maybe nearby, maybe far outside the center, maybe they're in a more rural area. But we find this to be a good metric to continue to track, because the proportion of folks living in centers is important for some of those transit amenities. Today, because with the, we credit some of the visioning work we've done, folks in the region have access to 360,000 job opportunities. We talk about access to opportunities a lot. That could be work or school. Folks are avoiding 800,000 more miles per day combined, of course. We have 40 square miles more farmland and open space because of centers. This is measured by if those units were spread out, how much of that farmland and open space would be eaten up. And centers save 30 million gallons of water per day. I have a little metric here. A home in a center uses an average of 200 fewer gallons per day, mostly yard work, right? That's mostly taking care of lawns. In Utah, we love our Kentucky bluegrass. Despite being a very arid climate, we have big lawns. A lot of cities have put ordinances in place to make sure they're not requiring that, but even encourage new development to have some more water-wise landscaping, but a big part of that is just how much yard you have. We have a lot of folks that are aging out of their large lots, and they don't want to take care of all of that anymore, and they don't have a lot of choice of where to go next. So that's something we talk about a lot, is being able to age in place, all the different units you need throughout your life, and being able to enter the market with a unit that fits your needs, whether it is for rent or for sale. But we'd like for people to be able to have the opportunity to own if they'd like to. Okay, that's all about centers and benefits. We talked about some questions throughout. Is there anything else? Any ideas brewing? Any question back there, Craig?
Hey, yeah, so back to 40 acres of farmland that was preserved, how's that framed, or was that an issue that was used as part of the sort of selling or building support for the approach, or is that more like a benefit after the fact that you highlight?
So we talk about the trade-offs throughout the planning process, and that trade-off might be that if you concentrate some of your growth near your more robust transportation, you may be able to preserve some of the farmland. But the metric I just showed is solely looking back and measuring what could have been. And so we don't necessarily, we're actually working on some more hypothetical metrics related to those models, the existing condition, the before and after of those center models, completely hypothetical, but it's the more nuanced metrics of that specific center. Yeah, that's purely just looking back.
So has that also been quantified in like a value of, like, to the economy of the preserved farmland, or other ways of measuring that, or just the total amount?
No, we haven't, yeah.
The assumption, hey, it's valuable, it's because we use it, it's
Yeah.
having local agricultural
Yes, and I think it, like locally in Utah, it's seen pretty widely as being really important. You know, it's a big water guzzler, but it's also a big part of who we are in Utah, and there's a lot of sensitivity to farmland lost. And in our rural communities, our periphery communities, a lot of folks will say we moved here because of the farms, or you know, they're nostalgic about it or sad to see it going. It's also a lot of farmers really want out, and so that's a pinch that we are often dealing with, is that there's farmers that are like, yeah, I don't like it either, but I gotta sell this land. My kids aren't gonna farm it. You're not gonna farm it. So we have a lot of conversations about farmland in Utah. So maybe locally, that's a pretty easy win, is preservation of farmland for the most part. Yeah.
Is there a lot of discussion about compatibility with existing neighborhoods as you're building these centers? Is that all kind of worked into the discussion?
Yeah, and much of that discussion really happens in more detail when we're working directly with the city on a plan. We go to all kinds of lengths in codes that we write to try and build transitions in from neighborhoods. I worked on I had an image from it here. I'll go forward for just a little bit. This is a project I worked on in a community in our region called Cottonwood Heights. They are not on transit at all, but they have a vision for a city center in their area. They don't really have a center. They're right on the foothills of our Wasatch Mountains, and so they're kind of a center. They're the urban skiing center, I would say, for our region, but not in a gathered way. And so they bought this large parcel, this large piece of property, 10 acres, and their intent with purchasing it was to enter into a partnership with a developer. And so we put together a team that we really had their eye on like what would be in that request for proposals for development partners. So we were really practical. We were looking at feasibility. We had a developer on our consulting team, actually. We had a financial consultant, urban design, et cetera. And we spent a lot of time and site visits going to one person's house in particular, but he kind of represented his neighborhood, just looking at view sheds. View sheds in Utah is kind of a heated topic because we have very lovely views, but it's a hard thing because folks don't own the view over the parcel next to them. So it's a hard conversation to have, but the city really wanted community buy-in and community support for this project, and so I don't think I've ever seen heights modeled in so many different ways as with this project. But yeah, something like that's not a transition so much as it is. It is kind of a transition, but this person wasn't necessarily saying, I don't want to be next to this. They were saying, I don't want to look at the back of this. So it's kind of similar, but different. And we spend a lot of time. And we have some examples in some template code that include an option for the way you could write your code around transitions. Okay. Anything else? Centers or benefits?
I really like everything you talked about with centers. You're probably not surprised to hear this, but I feel like I'm behind it 100%. How would you explain to someone who goes from department store, tons of parking, to a center where they're not used to not being able to find somewhere to park? I feel like that's, and same sort of thing with like building codes and laws around that. What kind of things do you run into with that?
Absolutely. I guess I would start by saying, if there's a department store that's really thriving and they want to keep going there, that's okay, right? I wouldn't try to convince somebody to change all their errands to difficult parking errands. But if they wanted to, I do think another thing we work on in some of our smaller area plans is parking wayfinding, just making parking easier to find. Typically in centers, there is parking. Well, not all centers. In Utah centers, there's usually quite a bit of parking. You're just not finding it. Or maybe it's just not quite where you wanted it to be. You didn't want to go into the garage, you wanted to be in front of the door, right? But we do a lot of work around parking wayfinding. A joke we tell sometimes is, man, nobody's gonna go there, it's too crowded. We think that that's kind of funny. Because if it's crowded, a lot of people are going there, right? If you're not finding parking, it's working really well, the center's thriving. Yeah, that's a tough conversation to have. It's helpful if there's another mode of transportation that's an option. It's helpful if your parking is well designated. I also think one reality we deal with when we're doing this small area planning, we tend to bring in a lot of market feasibility consultants from kind of different areas of the industry, because ultimately, if it's not feasible, the private sector can't build it. Even if you have a developer that loves the idea, they want to build it tomorrow, they don't necessarily have generational wealth backing them, the banks won't finance it if they think people can't park there, right? And so we talk a lot about just the reality of our world. If you're right on transit, the banks are, I say the banks, I don't work in banking, but like it's this big overarching, maybe it is. But the banks are kind of coming around locally to accepting the addition of transit to a project as an amenity and lowering what they would expect for parking. But we have had a lot of communities, I'm getting a little bit on tangent from your question, but we have had a lot of communities in our region who are like, we're not requiring any parking, but they still want 4 units per 1,000 square feet for this office, for parking stalls per 1,000 square feet of this office, which is high. And I think ultimately that's because that's what their financing will support, and that's how they think they can get tenants there. So parking is, I think for my deputy director, my manager, it's like his lifelong like grievance that parking kind of kills the beauty of a lot of the projects. But I think if it's a neighborhood where people are going to drive, you kind of make it so that they can park and find it. But maybe the parking doesn't have to be right up front, right where you're walking. I don't want to talk about parking too long, it's depressing. Okay, I'm going to go into technical assistance. I already actually kind of talked about it a lot because there's been some questions about how are people actually doing this. One thing we're very honest with our communities about is it's a lot easier to draw your center on the Wasatch Choice vision than it is to make it happen, and we know that. And so we have worked with some of our cities, we've been working with them for 10 plus years on the gradual implementation of a center. And maybe we started at like, what's the vision? Or we started with lots of public outreach to even get the center in their city plans. We moved to some more small area planning, right? Maybe we've now written zoning, and with some communities we've even worked on like private sector marketing. Like how would your city market this to develop your community if you're not seeing the kind of partners that you want? So we talk about think regionally, act locally a lot. And the act locally is just so much more nuanced and time consuming. We have a great staff of 31 people at WFRC. We make this great regional vision. If those 31 people were to try to implement it throughout our region, no way, we'd be strapped for capacity. So we have to find ways to both increase our capacity and increase the capacity of the cities to help with that act locally piece. The technical assistance we provide and have provided for about a decade is in planning. We do a lot of planning with our cities. They can apply for their planning needs. We do evaluate the applications on does it fit the vision? Does it actually implement the vision? But we also meet cities where they are. There's a lot of cities in our region that they're not having conversations about, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful if we had some growth and change right here. They're having conversations about how do we stop all growth forever? Oh my goodness, please, no more. We'll help those cities too, absolutely. We're not pushing growth, we're just trying to help our region deal with it because it's a reality that we face. And then when we've moved on from the planning and we have a lovely local vision, all kinds of things can happen, right? We can work on design, like I did with that community I talked about in Common Heights, work on ordinances, we're writing lots of ordinances, and we actually have a lot of cities in our region that have decided, especially larger cities, they've decided it's time to bite the bullet and fully refresh their local ordinances, which is a massive project. It takes years and years. And then implementation, like that marketing brochure to the development community to try and help the city show itself as a willing partner and as a good partner. Some cities they just don't have the right private sector partners knocking on their doors, or the private sector partner wouldn't know if they were the right one, right? Because you know what I mean? Like they're just not putting the right things out there to welcome a developer that gets their vision, if the developer can find their vision at all, right? So we do help folks in that space, or in like bringing in a financial consultant to evaluate the financial feasibility of something, or bringing in a civil engineering group to kind of study the available infrastructure and capacity and things like that if we're doing some infill and redevelopment. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're good.
Are you paying, like, you're paying for that?
Yes.
You're bringing them in?
Yes, so we have a couple of programs. We have our, what we call our Transportation and Land Use Connection Program. We have a station area planning program. I'm going to talk about both of those. And then we do some in-house support. So the in-house support is limited because we have a limited staff. I have 6 staff, myself, and they have a whole lot of other things to do in addition to like deeply work on a project, but it's very enriching to them to actually dive in with the city and be the ones to write their plan. So we do some of that, but most of it's through our Transportation and Land Use Connection and our stationary planning, which I'll talk about both of those and the dollar amounts behind them. So we call it TSC, Transportation and Land Use Connection. It's cute. It's kind of been my baby at WFRC. I started as an intern the year that we began this program, and I've worked on it ever since. It's grown and changed a lot. So this is a program that started in our first funding year was 2014 when we gave out our first awards. The program started at $300,000. It was just us and Salt Lake County putting a little bit of money in at the time. That's our most populated county. We funded, I think, way too many projects that year. I think it was like 12 with $300,000. That was 10 years ago, but planning costs haven't gone up that much. That was just too much. But there was just such a buildup of need for assistance in planning in our region. And so every year since it's grown, it's now $2 million annually. That also funds some of my team members. But it's a partnership now with our Department of Transportation and our Transit Authority as well. WFRC is the largest partner in that. We're putting surface transportation planning dollars toward that. A very small drop in the bucket compared to hopefully some of the road widenings that are saved by some of these projects, or infrastructure needs that perhaps could be avoided, though I'm sure it's adding a lot of infrastructure needs or bike lanes and things like that as well. But this is our kind of bread and butter program. It's an annual application. Cities all over the region can apply. We do a lot of looking out for the need as well, especially for cities that aren't frequent flyers to the program. But we like to see projects through, and so some of these cities, like I said, some of these, like one area, one center, may have had 4 or 5 projects through the years to continue to push it toward implementation. It's tough to make these things happen. Some of our cities have bonded and made huge investments, and it's paid off for them. They've achieved their center a little bit more quickly this way. Some of our cities are just trying to maintain what maybe was a historic main street through clover and things. But if you're envisioning a brand new center from scratch on land you don't own, there's a lot of variables there, and there's a lot of people to convince to invest with you, and you have to have a really solid plan or a really solid code, right? So this work happens over time. Is there anything I can answer about that?
No, that's
Okay.
yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah, so this is now 11 years going. Anything from city general plans, comprehensive plans, to these small area plans I'm talking about, really diving into a neighborhood, doing detailed planning there. Active transportation plans, we've funded lots of citywide or sub-regional bike plans, bike and ped plans. And then all kinds of things in between, some like lots of financial studies, economic development plans or studies, co-work, of course. I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything big. Sometimes we've done studies that are multiple cities together, looking at one complex facility and the land use along it as if it is a network. So if there's a new highway coming in, each of the cities might say, well, we don't all want to recruit local gas station X and make that our economic development plan for this interchange, so let's work together. Question?
I might have missed this, but who funds you?
Who funds us? So we are, because we're a Metropolitan Planning Organization, It's federally recognized. We have some formula funding. It comes from the federal government, from federal highways. That's 70% of our budget in Utah at W4C. Local membership funds, our cities and our counties pay a small membership fee. And then we do have some state money that's come to us for various activities that the state has asked us to do.
Has there been any changes in your federal?
Yeah, the federal reauthorization happens every 5 years. Greg probably knows better than I do, maybe 5 years. The most recent one that we're working off is the Infrastructure and Jobs Act.
Infrastructure Investment.
Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. They're working on reauthorization right now, and so it can always change for sure. Right now, we're in an environment where there's increased stable formula funds, but lots of new grants over time from like the Federal Transit Authority or Federal Highways Administration. And so we in Utah aren't applying for very many of those grants because we've been kind of supplemented by some state funding and stuff. I'm waiting on one answer right now. But yes, the federal funds can change.
So with you being involved, does that expedite FHWA funding or other sources from federal grants and so forth? Or?
It could in economic development more than anything, because we have an economic development district. Amy, correct, you have an economic development district here?
Not in our region.
Okay. It provides access to some additional economic development funding, and we kind of act as a liaison. The formula fund, so if we help a city with some of our planning technical assistance per se, we do not currently have a mechanism where they're prioritized in any way for our capital dollars. We do have about $50 million in capital investment money. We don't have a way to say, okay, they graduated from planning technical assistance, they move up the list over here. We've talked about it over the years. $50 million a year is pretty small in comparison to what the state transportation dollars are funding as well. And so we've talked about trying to use that to have a little bit more of an impact, but not really. Not really. We could do technical assistance hypothetically to evaluate possible grant sources, federal grant sources for a project. That's TLC. Here's the history I just really talked through. I didn't mention, it was born out of one of our committees. Under our Wasatch Front Regional Council, made up of local elected officials, our transit authority, our DOT, our several committees. One of them we called the Regional Growth Committee. There were the vision conversations are mainly had, as well as conversations related to land use policy sometimes, just allowing them to communicate with each other and with us what their preferences are with some of these land use changes, or us helping them to meet the requirements that have come about. The Regional Growth Committee, over 10 years ago now, essentially they asked us, I think the idea was posed, but they asked us to provide the support, and so we've had our elected council support year over year to grow this program. They don't see it as a takings of the capital dollars that this can be spent. The $1.3 million that goes to this program every year wouldn't fund half of most of our capital improvement projects, so they see it as a worthwhile investment.
The Regional Growth Committee, is that like a subcommittee of your board?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we call our board a council, but
Okay.
yep, exactly. We have several subcommittees, and that's one of them. This is an awesome map online. I encourage you to poke around if you're looking for inspiration for local planning projects or what a region might be able to help with. We're up to like 160 projects or something like that have been funded over the years, and you can sort this by what's complete, and then the data over on the right-hand side will show you give you a link to the products. So all of the final products of everything we funded, if it can be shown, usually there's a document or something. All the final products you're able to access through the site. It's available on our website, and I can give you the direct link too. But it's fun to watch this turn into sprinkled donut over the years. There's lots of projects. Okay, stationary planning is another one. This is a little more niche. So, station area plans might just be a small area plan. It's something we've been doing for a really long time when we have a transit station and looking at, okay, how should this area around the station grow and change? Are there transit-oriented development opportunities? Are there opportunities for more connections for people to access the station by car or bike? We've been doing this planning for a long time. But in 2022, let me go to this. In 2022, the state required it. So now in Utah, if you have a fixed transit station, you have to plan around a half mile if it's rail, and if it's bus that has its own lane, you have to plan around a quarter mile, and you have to plan to meet these objectives as a city. Housing availability and affordability. This was born out of housing conversations on the Hill. Sustainable environmental conditions, access to opportunities, which has become kind of a locally accepted term, really need to just get in places you need to go, particularly if they have a way to better your situation, and transportation choices and connections. The state did, go ahead.
What is a BRT station?
Bus rapid transit
I mean, what's a station? If you're not talking about regular bus stop, you're talking.
Yeah, so typically when I wish there was a slightly more consistent term used for this all over the country, but when a bus, we call it now enhanced bus in Utah, when a bus becomes more than just that, sometimes it's a larger vehicle, more robust stops, so the stations are a little bit more built out, and often it has its own lane. We start to call it bus rapid transit. Typically it's traveling a little farther or a little faster than traffic, pick up more people, etc. No. It's a solution that's being deployed more and more in our region because rail has always been expensive to build, but is now much more expensive than when we built our original system. We have a few new enhanced bus or bus rapid transit lines in our region. One's in Ogden, closer to Idaho in Weber County. One's kind of west of our Salt Lake City area in a really dense, slightly more bedroom community. So through our really dense areas that just don't have a lot of opportunity for rail, we're doing a lot of enhanced bus. Where it does have its own lane, it's been recognized by the state as a significant transit mode and it needs to have this stationary plan around it. So in 2022, this was required by the state somewhat as a little bit of a compromise. I won't say that directly because it wasn't like someone voted like this is a compromise. But at the state level, during our legislative session, there was some proposals on the table to preempt local land use control around transit stations. We are in a housing crisis. Like I said, the easy stuff's been done. So the conversations are getting harder at the state level. And one of those conversations is the state needs to take over and permit more housing. We know in the regional work that we do and working closely with our cities that while we need more housing, the cities know their communities best. They have the local context. A lot of bad things could happen if the state said you can build a whole bunch of things right here where the city's like, hey, there's a lot of reasons why not. And so the stationary planning was proposed and ultimately put into law as a bit of a compromise. It struck a balance between requiring city action, cities have to do something, but also preserving local choice. The cities are required to produce a plan that increases housing availability and affordability around transit, but in their own context, in their own way. And so ever since then, in the last 3 years, we've been assisting cities with that. The state also, the State Office of Economic Opportunity and the MPOs partnered with some money, $5 million to do this work, to help the cities do this work. These plans have a deadline. So at the end of this year, most of these plans are due. So I'm busy because we're helping all the cities with these plans. We have money to help them, hire consultants, and we sit with them throughout the process to to both provide planning expertise and ensure that they're going to meet the state code when they're done. These planning processes take a long time. Originally, when this was being thought up, I remember my boss calling me and saying, "Is a year enough time?" And I was about ready to quit my job because a year was not enough time to get all of these cities to plan for all of their stations. There's 140-ish, 127 stations in our region that need a plan. Some cities, like Salt Lake City, who have, I think Salt Lake City has about 30, they get more time because that's crazy. But cities have to have up to 4 of them to the end of this year adopted and approved by the NPO. So our council, our Wasatch Front Regional Council, has to certify that these plans meet code. So this is something pretty new for us as a region. We have not certified anything that the cities have done before. We're trying to do so respectfully and with enough deference to local control, but also to make sure we're upholding the spirit of the code. We say we're doing so with a spirit of reasonableness. My executive director is a lawyer, so but this is new. Amy.
Have you had or seen any pushback from the cities either against the MPO doing the certification or just against the law in general in terms of state preemption, state overreach, and telling cities what to do?
Generally, across the board, state overreach, telling cities what to do. Yes, lots of formal and informal groaning. We work. I might have this later in my presentation, but I'll talk about it now because it's relevant. We work outside of session all year, really well in Utah. During session, there's all kinds of topics that different committees of our legislature will say, "Hey, you guys work on this throughout the next interim period," and come back with a proposal, and we have what's called the Land Use Task Force. We talked about this a little bit earlier. The Land Use Task Force is mostly a two-headed entity. It's made up of our Utah League of Cities and Towns, speaking voices of our cities, voices of our counties as well, and the Property Rights Coalition is what it's called. But it's essentially developers, mostly residential developers, mostly home builders. The Association of Realtors is a part of that, and different private interests are represented there. And then we have the state property rights ombudsman's office and all kinds of other players come to the table. And it's a very respectful space, and there's sometimes a lot of contention because we're working on really hard things. But this task force meets throughout interim and then often has worked out a lot of the non-starters of things, and there's typically a proposal to legislators working with that committee something that has enough consensus, or there's an agreement at the end that maybe we can't reach consensus on something, we can keep talking about it next year, or maybe someone will run a bill. But we work really well in the interim about that, and every year I think the cities feel like they get a few more stars every year. As far as local control, but so much has been prevented during those, just the way that we push things to committees and we push things to task forces and working groups. Station area planning has been interesting, particularly to me because it's very much our more urban communities. These are communities usually that have some more staff, more than 0 for sure, which is some of our cities. But they have a planning staff. Most of those cities, it's not like this is the first time they thought about what to do around a transit station. And so it's sort of an opportunity for them to demonstrate, hey, we're trying. Cities don't build housing, some of ours do, not very many. But I think some of them looked at it as an opportunity to say, yeah, we have this plan, we'll update it, we'll work with you, we'll make it much better. Some of them were really welcoming the money that came to do that and the partnership with our organization. The ones that saw it as the most annoying are probably the cities that are the furthest along with their transit-oriented development. They're like, okay, that's admin, right? And it is, every state requirement is an admin add. As far as WFRC certifying the plans, that's part of the good part about this bill because we do have that trust. We're a little closer to the cities. We have some other housing policy at the state level that is certified by state departments. And I think there's a sentiment that that's pretty, that it's kind of a cold, the state department is just really far from that city. And so it's a really check the box kind of a review. Whereas I think there's just, there's more appetite for the regions to do that.
One other question on the certification, is that just a staff doing a technical certification, or is that something that your board actually votes on?
Yeah, we had to come up with a policy to do this, right? Because it's not something we do, particularly on land use, to certify a local plan. There's some heartburn. I had some hard conversations with some good friends at the cities, right, about this being a little bit of a change in our role. Our policy is that we work with them throughout, and it's actually required by code that they involve us in their planning. So there shouldn't be any surprises when they submit their adopted plan to us. Staff reviews. I'm always telling my staff it would be really embarrassing if you worked with a city on a plan and then it's not up to code. So make sure you're looking for that for them and with them throughout. We make a staff recommendation to our regional growth committee, who then recommends to council to certify that plan. Only thing for us, really different, it's, I still have a lot of friends at the cities, so it's going okay. But yes, it's been a change. Okay, so that's stationary planning. The really fun part is that we have some money to spend to just create these wonderful plans with the cities in our region. We have this map that's tracking progress where everyone's at. If you want to know how I'm doing in December, open the map. You'll know if I'm happy or sad, because this is a big deadline coming, and we feel a lot of responsibility as an organizations to help the cities show that this balance of local control with some state objectives can work. Okay, oh, and in the plans that we've done so far and certified, these are the ones that are certified, they're good to go, they've met their requirements. Over 50,000 new housing units are planned. This is in almost 50 plans. So we do feel like it's making an impact in the housing space, and the cities all feel like they're left with a good plan. City councils aren't, they absolutely want to meet the deadline, but they're not going to settle on these plans, right? They are very engaged and very involved, and they're making sure that the plan works for their community. So we're proud of that number, and transit's a great place for housing to be. You can get lots of places with multiple nodes on transit. I have a couple of examples up here. The one I'll talk about is, this kind of gets to Amy's question. We have a city in our region called West Jordan. West Jordan's mostly bedroom community, but lots of retail. It's a larger city, I don't know, probably 30,000 people, I would guess. And they had actually been working on a stationary plan for years and years, over a decade. They'd kind of been planning the station over and over again through some failed contracts or just failed attempts, and they couldn't get to consensus. And they sort of welcomed this legislation as a resource to get there. And they have a really wonderful plan now that they're really proud of. And some of that's timing. The city was ready to make some decisions about how they wanted to grow at that station. But it's one example of how it was just kind of a pretty easy and welcomed, because the city's been trying to figure this out. And they too want to utilize their transit station as the amenity that it is.
And the station is that red dot?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and another thing that the code is sensitive to is that a half mile from the station might not be just carte blanche or really wonderful infill. There's probably a lot of housing in that. And so we create a planned area within each of these station areas that's respectful to people's homes and things like that are on the ground. Some of it has really long-term visions for maybe some industrial area that the property owner and the tenant are like, we're here to stay. Say, okay, great. If you ever go, there's a wonderful plan in place. So this allowed us to probably save a lot of those property owners from some headaches if the state were to say, you can build X amount of stations, I'm sure someone would knock on their door every single day trying to get them to sell, right? So hopefully these have provided locally appropriate, wonderful transit-oriented development plans for these cities.
I know you said this before, but can you just remind us, what were the housing requirements that went with the stationary plans?
There was no minimum housing requirement. The goal that cities need to achieve to a degree of reasonableness is to increase affordability and availability of housing. And so some cities have taken the approach, especially end of the line, say an end of the line community, they're the last station on the line, they might have said, well, it doesn't actually make sense for us to try to make a really dense center here. It's the end of the line, but it might be a really wonderful place for some first homeowner opportunities, folks that could use the transit system to get all around the region as far as they want to take it to some job opportunities. And so maybe those cities have focused more on home ownership opportunities, which our state is very focused on right now. Our conversation on housing 8 years ago used to kind of be, we just need more housing of all types everywhere, and now it's a little bit more nuanced. We need housing in the best places for it, and we need some opportunities for ownership too. Part of that is because apartments went gangbusters while rates were low, and you could just point to a parcel and an apartment penciled there. So we have a lot of those coming online or recently come online, but we don't have a lot of new home ownership opportunities. So some stations took that approach, some cities. Some stations have been wanting to be a bigger, bolder center. One of our cities, South Jordan, neighbors to these guys, our AAA baseball team just struck a deal with them to go to their area. So they created a stadium district around, and they wanted that growth, they wanted that change. So I don't remember where I started here. Oh, the housing requirements. In fact, one city was demanding from me, what is the minimum amount of housing? And that was a really tough conversation because I was like, there is none. And I think that I said a really giant number, they would have said, okay, fine, we'll do it. But I think that they just wanted clarity, they wanted to know that they were going to be okay, and they were, looking for what do we have to do. Now that city has a really lovely plan. I have an image of, that is an image from the plan I was talking about, of the city that just wanted me to tell them the minimum. So that's stationary planning. There's a lot of those, and you're working to have those final plans represented on that map as well. They might be here now, the links to those stationary plans. They're lovely planning documents. I think the stationary planning consulting community is a really prestigious one. You want to look at some of those. Okay, getting to the end here. I can spend time on anything. There's some really technical stuff at the end here, tax increment financing tools that I plan to mostly talk about tomorrow, and then some stuff about condos. But I want to make sure I'm talking about what you guys want to hear and talk about. Is there any preferences? Should I pivot? Talk about things that we've gone through? It's 7:30. Yeah.
Just to clarify, at the beginning you mentioned there was maybe a 44,000 home, I don't know if deficit was the word, but, and then in one of the last slides you mentioned 57,000 that were planned?
Planned, yes.
Okay, so do you feel like you're making progress? Those aren't homes that are built?
Yeah, if these were homes that were built, I'd be real proud of here. But I am proud because these are housing units that were planned, and maybe eventually these cities would have got around to planning this. Maybe they would have written their plans differently if there was no housing objective to the requirement, or 8 years ago, they would have put all office, right? So times are changing. Cities are, the cities in our region want to be part of the solution. But these are planned units. Some of those, I could see them coming online in the next 5 years for sure. Cost of construction, permitting, market giveth and the market taketh. But a lot of these will be a lot further down the road. But if the city stays true to their plan, that's a lot better than the alternative of what could come with these transit stations. To me, transit stations are a little bit special. The investment is sunk. The infrastructure is there. I think that there's a responsibility in some ways to make sure that that doesn't go to waste for lack of a better term, and there's an opportunity cost, a big one, to developing anything at a transit station, because you might be building something that will contribute no riders to the system and nobody will use transit to get there. And so, we have roads all over, we don't have transit all over. And so I just think that these areas are a little special, and this number is housing units planned in a good spot. If they were built today, maybe we'd have our solution. That 44,000 deficit though is statewide, and our transit system is not. That's another thing to keep in mind. Station area planning really only affects the Wasatch Front. Okay. Couple other things. I've actually just discussed some of these policy conversations a little bit, but there's a few other ways that our organization as a regional government organization engages in the housing space. And this has really grown over the last decade and really the last 5 years. That same infrastructure bill, Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IIJA, for the first time kind of welcomed, invited Metropolitan Planning Organizations into the housing space. We were already talking about it because housing and transportation are linked. Absolutely, and land use and transportation are linked. But I think that that change in policy, we didn't overnight create a housing department or anything like that. But I think it gave us a little bit more confidence in this space, and I think we've engaged a little bit more meaningfully since. Part of that is a sign of the times. Our state demands it from us. Everybody has to be part of the solution. And part of it is that policy change. So it'll be interesting with the reauthorization of the next version of that bipartisan infrastructure law. See if that's changed or, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. But we do engage in policy conversations. One example of that is how we engage with stationary planning. There's a couple of other examples. These are all tax increment financing tools that we've worked on with our state legislature and our partners. So I can go into the details if anyone would really like, but we've worked on tools for cities, new tools. There's already one tool in place, a community reinvestment area. We worked on new tools for cities to capture future taxable value, finance against it, and then provide that funding to help to create those improvements now. So one of our station areas, for example, that would be in a housing and transit reinvestment zone. So these are all kind of specific to where they can be. Those three on the screen: housing and transit reinvestment zone, home ownership promotion zone, and first home investment zone. Some are transit adjacent, some are far from transit is the requirement. But if, say, a city has a wonderful stationary plan in place, they have willing property owner, development partner, maybe plural, maybe they have multiple property owners and development partners, but the vision just doesn't pencil. The vision has some affordable housing in it, the vision has a mix of uses in it, some public amenities, maybe a park, but it just doesn't pencil because construction's expensive, land's expensive, everything's expensive. So the future value of what that neighborhood would create can be captured and financed against to create a funding resource to create those improvements, partner with developers, and fill that financing gap. That's what all of these do. They just all have some different housing affordability or home ownership requirements. Some of these require that some of the homes are restricted for, deed restricted for ownership for X amount of years. I have actually what I think will be great is you guys will have access to my slides and you can look at the details of this and contact me if you want to talk about it more because they look like that. I don't know if anyone wants to look at that. Like I said, the low-hanging fruit has been picked and it's getting more complicated every time we have a legislative session. Oh, you want to look at those? Look, this one is the first home investment zone. It has to be not within a half mile of transit.
And that one only 25% has to be owner occupied?
Yes. This one gets really hairy because you can kind of take density built outside of the area and pull it in, but there's an acreage minimum, maximum, and an affordability requirement and a home ownership requirement. No one has used this yet, but lots of cities are working on it. It's so complicated. It's actually been amended before it got used.
Are you going into depth tomorrow morning on these?
I was planning to.
You're planning to, okay.
Yeah.
Be there.
Okay. I fear many of you will hear a lot of this again, but it's their weedy. And this one is for rural communities. More rural communities. Okay. You can see our state is crunching all kinds of numbers, making all kinds of policy compromise to try and get at this housing puzzle, and specifically homeownership has been, for the last 2 years, really central to that discussion.
Well, I have a question.
Mhm.
I know, I'm with you tomorrow.
Okay.
The homes in the area must be deemed restricted for at least 5 years, what is it?
Yeah, so that means the home, if sold, is restricted, that it has to be sold. It can't just appreciate to market value overnight. So if you buy that house and you want to own it for 2 years and then sell it, your appreciation is capped. You can't just say, oh, the house down the street sold for this much, so.
What if the person is deceased?
It's still in any kind of a sale, a transaction, it would have to abide by this.
Still pertains to the.
Yeah, whoever inherits that house is, the deed restriction runs with the land.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah.
Are these specifically single occupancy homes, or do these same things apply, for instance, to townhomes or condos or that type of thing?
The first home investment zone is where you would likely see lots of condos just because of the density requirement, townhomes. Condos is a whole other piece of what I'm gonna talk about tomorrow. I can get into that a tiny bit tonight. But just because of the density requirements, you'll kind of see different housing product types eligible. You have to have some townhomes to meet this density requirement. At minimum, you probably need mostly townhomes, if not some apartments. Not this one though, not the hop. So we call this the fizz, and we call this the hops. You're not building new breweries, you're just tax incrementals. Okay, so those are some tools we've worked on at the state level. TBD and seeing some of these put to work, but we have, I think, 8 housing transit reinvestment zones established to date, so around transit. Okay, and the last way that we engage in the housing space is just being at the table, being part of the conversation, learning from our partners that do housing all day, every day. We have some wonderful organizations or nonprofits that I've only been introduced to in the last 5 or so years because the worlds are a little separate, and now we're all kind of coming together to solve this from a multidisciplinary or different points of view. We provide some tools to be helpful in these conversations on our website. This one is the Housing Inventory Explorer. It's only fun to play with. This image doesn't do much for you, but you can select cities or counties, you can look at subregions, you can sort by housing type, you can look by transportation infrastructure and see just units that exist today and the breakdown for those housing types. This is pretty helpful in our region. This is data that wasn't easily available before, or at least viewable in this way. We've produced a tool recently called the, with partners, called the Missing Middle Housing Toolkit. This is probably helpful in Idaho too. We have what's called the Land Use Training Fund at the state. Our Property Ombudsman's Office has a program. We utilize that funding with our partner to the south, Mountain Land Association of Governments, to kind of come up with a guidebook for cities. What types of housing might not be in your cities that might fit. This might be townhomes, duplexes, there's like 12 different types up there on the screen. Just housing that's somewhere in the middle. It's not necessarily a large single family home. It's not an apartment. Somewhere in the middle. That some of these can provide ownership opportunities that apartments cannot. Condos are really tough in our region right now. I'm gonna flip through it really quickly, but condos is something I spent a lot of time last year on. I learned a lot as someone who didn't come from the housing world. I convened a working group, so a condo, just for definition's sake, condo ownership does not necessarily have land beneath it that is deemed as part of what you own. So fee simple ownership is where you own the land under you. It's like a townhome. Condo, you do not. See, that's really the definition difference. But there are a whole bunch of obstacles to condos. I won't get fully into all of it, but I'll give an overview here. These are issues all over the country, particularly in the West. The numbers just aren't working for condos. The reasons we really want them, this is my little condo pitch, space, they take up less space. Entry into the market, and that one, there's just a more affordable unit than a single family home or often a townhome. And demographic change. That aging population I talked about has a 5-bedroom house on their acre lot. They don't want to mow it anymore. Their kids have their houses, they can go visit. They just want something smaller. And I think a lot of those folks are realizing that that doesn't exist nearby. It exists probably somewhere and they can probably afford it if they've set themselves up financially the way that they would have liked. Some of them not so much. Seniors are often their income is fixed, and so I think aging is a big part of the conversation. But here are some of the barriers. And we had a working group last year. There was about 20 of us. There was fire officials, bankers, a few developers, architects, insurance folks, a really multifaceted group, and some city attorneys came together to just talk about, well, for about half of the time we spent together, talk about all of these obstacles at depth. And when we were all going, okay, so is there anything we can do about it? We started to talk about some solutions. Our state, Utah Housing Corporation, the Department of the State is now working on a program to support the financing of condos. These are the big obstacles that we uncovered. Insurance is very expensive and hard to get because litigation is so common with townhomes. In Utah, in 2008, we actually put into code some protection against this litigation, but it doesn't necessarily make a difference to insurance providers because they look sub-regionally, like we're grouped in with Colorado, Nevada, et cetera. And so the rates are the rates. So the conversation was, can the state help to insure some of these projects to be? So essentially what you go to for insurance is a surplus line. They're much more expensive. You can insure anything. It just might cost you a lot. Financing, higher rates have of course been challenging, and financing for condos specifically has a higher rate than what might be the financing rate for an apartment development. You have to pre-sell a lot of your 51% of your condo units before breaking ground, according to some of the mortgage lending rules, and absorption into the market. If it was an apartment, you can just put everything up for lease tomorrow, but it takes some time for the developers to start getting back what they invested into condos. And cost, this is really summarized. I've got some development friends who would make this a much longer list. But the cost, oftentimes condos are built customizable, like another new build home. That's expensive for a developer compared to just doing everything renter friendly and the same like an apartment building. And parking, of course, you have to often pour concrete for parking, which is much more expensive and that's the same with an apartment, right? But that's the cost compared to, say, a townhome development. That's my condo rant.
With HOA fees also.
For the buyer,
Yeah.
Absolutely. HOA fees.
Yeah, easy entry, but hard to sustain.
Yeah, especially on some of our older condos, we're seeing some HOA fees, balloons. which is certainly a barrier. Still, those condos, those ones that exist, are often a much more affordable option than like a new build townhome in our region. There's not many condos though, existing for sale in Utah for these reasons. So we are working as a state on solving that. This is just an example, I know it's really in the weeds, but it's an example of how we as a regional organization can engage. There's a little bit of a imagination required for why we should be having a conversation about condos. But looking at our centers where we're encouraging a mix of housing, if that's denser housing, it's probably for rent, so that's not providing that ownership opportunity. And so I guess I use this to say you gotta dive all the way in to be a helpful part of the conversation. Even if housing isn't what you do, you have to kind of understand the whole picture. Okay. I have officially talked for a really long time. I think it's 10 minutes until we're done. Any questions?
So tomorrow, so now I'm trying to make a case for me to come back tomorrow.
Got here. And if you don't, I won't be offended.
You talked a little bit about doing some ordinance consultation with the cities. What does that mean? Do you have boilerplate ordinances that you're handing out to the smaller cities? And if you do, are they like population sized or?
We do not. This has been a long time kind of debate in our region. Boilerplate ordinances can be really helpful. I think there's some perceived liability to creating them and how they'll be used, etc. We do have a template form-based code that we've had for a long time now, probably 8 or 10 years, maybe more, that we've used with lots of cities. It still requires a full-blown contract, scope of work, and a year of back and forth with the city, right? Because it's code and it's just really detailed. And the form-based code template is really detailed and requires, it's very hungry for decisions to be made by the city. It's helpful, still as a guide to the process. We provide a couple of other resources. One is kind of new, and it's just as capacity allows. It's free anytime. But we heard from cities in a couple of different ways. Developers say it's impossible to build here, but we don't know why. We don't know what's wrong with our zoning that makes it so bad. So we offer just a complimentary audit. It's just our staff looking through like, what are you trying to accomplish? And then we have the ability to reach out to the development community and make everything anonymous and just say, what's wrong with this? But usually we just go through and we find some gaps or some contradictions in their code. And then we also have transportation land use connection, so we can provide that robust technical assistance to do updates.
Yeah.
The audits have been interesting. It's usually our kind of smaller, rapid growth communities who are like, what's wrong with this? And there's a lot of copy and pasting in the zoning world and things that just weren't meant for your city. So that's been interesting.
Do you provide housing policy consultation, I guess, for the smaller communities too, or is that too much in the weeds?
With the really small communities, we do.
Oh.
We have a whole other program that's new, it's funded by the state, but we have a person on my team who is assigned to only help with more like city admin stuff, to only help the cities with no city manager. Those are really small. There's 14 of them in our region. So she's kind of their temporary part-time city manager, and so she gets into that with them. Through a transportation land use connection program, we certainly talk a lot about housing policy and planning.
Okay.
But we don't have the capacity to help everybody always with to say housing plans come to us for help anytime. But as our help is requested, we usually try to find a way. There's not always the capacity.